All right, I'm going to talk to you a little bit today in the first video from me that you'll be watching this year, first of many. We're going to continue our look at research methods in psychology, or methods that are used by psychological researchers in trying to establish explanations, theories, testing, reports on behavior. First off, we'll just do a quick review of naturalistic observation. It's a natural setting. The researcher simply observes behavior without doing any manipulation of variables. All it is observing subjects or people, animals in a specific setting where the researcher is out of that setting and just watching. Naturalistic observation results in a description of behavior, not an explanation. It's simply, this is what happened in this setting. For example, a researcher may decide to investigate the type and amount of aggressive behavior between elementary school children on a playground. So the researcher is not going to go right into the middle of the playground. They're going to sit out of participation altogether and just observe. They may be on a bench 100 yards away, just watching the children as they come out for recess and maybe during lunch break, and they just record incidents of the aggressive behavior. Arguments over a ball, arguments over a slide or monkey bars or a swing. And then they would describe what they saw. They didn't do any manipulating of variables. They just observed behavior in a natural setting without interfering at all. Then they reported it as a description. This is what happened. Okay? You don't get cause and effect. You can't prove cause and effect with a naturalistic observation. Another type of research method is the survey. Now, surveys are very popular. They range from who are you going to most likely vote for in the next election, to what are your feelings or what's your attitude about electric cars versus gasoline cars, what's your attitude regarding more regulation to work against climate change. So a survey, it's simply asking questions. You have participants in the survey, you ask them questions, you get their answers, and then you compile the data. So the data is compiled, and then you try to make sense out of it. Like naturalistic observation, once again, there's no cause and effect. You're just gathering information and then reporting it as a description. 39% of the people surveyed say they don't approve of a certain political person, president, senator, congressman. They don't approve of what they're doing. There's no explanation. You're not explaining why. You can get their feelings about it, but you don't have cause and effect because you're not manipulating variables. All you're doing is asking questions. So in asking questions, it's really important in terms of how you word those questions. Wording affects. That's how the question is phrased. Do you favor environmental protection that will cause a loss of jobs? What are people going to say to that question? Versus, do you favor or oppose environmental protection as a resistance to climate change or response to climate change? It's worded differently. So wording effects can affect the results that you get. The way the question is phrased, if a question is poorly phrased or leading in a certain way toward positive or negative, the results are going to be influenced by the way the question is phrased. So the goal of surveys is to have neutral question phrasing. so that the people can hear the question, think about it, and respond more accurately. Now, yesterday we talked about the difference between a population and a sample, so I don't need to go through this really a whole lot. But remember, the population is the entire group being studied, and the sample is the participants chosen from the population. So if you're wondering about political attitudes or tendencies, you don't ask every registered voter in the United States. You draw a sample out of that population because then you can manage it. Most of the political polls that we see in the news or hear on the radio or wherever it might be, they have a sample of around 1,500 participants. Now, there's way more than 1,500 voters in the United States. But you can't ask them all, so you get a sample of that population to ask questions to and get their responses. And this makes random sampling critical to the information you get. If you had a sample of 1,500 voters in the United States and 1,200 of them were men, that's not a random sample. You excluded a large number of women voters. So, like I mentioned yesterday, the random sample requires, or it's a process in which every member of the population has an equal chance of being chosen for the sample. Every member has an equal chance of being chosen. You have to take care of, if you got all your 1,500 voters from New York City, that's not representative of the population. So you have to randomly select people from all different economic levels, all different locations in the country, all different genders, and so forth, to represent the sample. So you want your sample to be representative of the population, to represent the population. Okay. Now, one thing to think about in this, when you look at summaries or theories that come from a sample, is how many people were in the sample. If you're looking at 1,500 voters, where did they get them? All from Texas? That doesn't reflect the entire United States. If you're looking at 1,500 teenagers and their attitudes toward climate change, and they're all from San Francisco, that's not representative. So you have to make sure that your sample represents the population. And when you look at a sample, you look at a survey, you look at survey information, your first question should be, well, how big was the sample? The rule is larger samples are better. The larger the sample, the more likely it is to represent the population. The hope is, with a sample, can you generalize? Generalize the population. That means you take the information you got from 1,500 voters or 1,500 teenagers, okay, or 1,500 auto workers, whatever it might be. Does that sample represent the population? If it does, then you can generalize the results, the attitudes, the tendencies that you get from your sampling, from your questioning. You have a sample that represents the population and it's large, you can generalize the results, saying this is authentically true of the larger population.